guesstimation, how far along are we until somebody who's, say, 50 years old can live comfortably to 150? Or are you saying we're already at that point?
I think that we have a 50% chance of developing the technologies I'm talking about here within about 25 or 30 years. And the technologies we have at that point should, in my view, be sufficient that we can take someone who's, let's say, 60 years old at that point, in other words, let's say 30 years old now, and give them an extra 30 or so years of healthy life. In other words, essentially rejuvenate them, not completely, not totally comprehensively back to a 20-year-old, for example, but maybe back to the age of 40, the biological age of 40, such that they'll be maybe 90 years old before they get back to being biologically 60. And during that time, those 30 years, the therapies will have been improved in terms of their comprehensiveness, so that we can apply them again, the improved therapies, to the same people who are now 90, and rejuvenate them back to, let's say, biologically 30, and so on.
Well, I am a Christian, and I'm proud of my faith, but I don't like the quacks and kooks that take it and do a lot of weird things with her, even other groups, saying that even trying to extend life is impossible. Same folks that said we never fly, that we never have airplanes, we never have computers. I don't know how religiously it got to become a dogma that life extension doesn't exist or is a lie or is of the devil. So I wanted to kind of get into the social ramifications of this on the other side. I mean, if you don't die, how do you go to heaven or hell? Dr. de Grey, I don't know if we'll be able to ever, quote, live 1,000 years, but I know certainly with technology, people will be able to live a lot longer. There's no doubt of that. Will we still be human? Then that gets into the whole transhumanist, posthumanist discussion. And I think a lot of what you're talking about borders into that, but you're talking about the admitted technologies that can extend that are being developed. But what about people who have trouble dealing with this? Because in my last film, I quote futurist, saying we'll have world government and we can't let the general public have this stuff and we're going to get rid of them. And that's in Wired magazine. Kurzweil's talking about it. I mean, this is all being discussed, and how only the rich are going to be able to have it, and the suicide nihilist will, basically turn into spaceships and fly off the planet and then blow us up. These guys sound nuts, and they're getting huge prizes and money, and they're inventing computer technology, and they're billionaires, so people tend to listen to Bill Joy and others. He's a good guy, saying he goes to meetings with 200 elitists, and they're talking about all this. So certainly there's a science fiction element to it, but what was science fiction 50 years ago is reality today in so many cases. So my point is, how do you weigh the extremist on one end who are running around saying we're going to live forever next week with the people that say it's of the devil to even have a pacemaker?
It's much easier than you would think, actually. Because ultimately, all of what I'm talking about revolves around alleviating the suffering that most of us have to look forward to when we get older. And that's an awful lot of suffering, as we all know. If we find really comprehensive treatments to all of the various things that go wrong with our bodies in later life, then people are going to welcome those things. And there just happens that there's going to be this side effect that we won't tend to die in our sleep anymore. We will tend to wake up the following morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. But it should be regarded as a side benefit, not as the main goal, to live longer for the sake of living longer. And I think when you talk about it and you think about it that way, the idea that there might be any religious objection to it becomes a good deal, harder to defend.
I've just had other guests on like yourself. I've mentioned this in a film, and I've gotten criticism saying I'm basically a devil for even talking about it. But, how could you not talk about it? I remember when I had great-grandparents and grandparents dying when I was a kid, I thought, man, I don't want to watch my parents die. That's when I, very young, began to think about not even that I was going to get old or die myself, because I was so young, I thought I'd live forever. You have that bulletproof attitude, but I don't want these people I love to die. So I don't think it's evil to discuss these things.
Exactly, and they probably didn't want to die either. Even people who are getting quite frail and sick probably don't want to die immediately, and certainly people who are youthful mostly don't seem to want to die anytime soon. And the question therefore is, how do we arrange to maximize the ability of people to live as long as they want to and to stay healthy as long as they want to. It seems to me that the message from Scripture is very clear there, for example, that we're supposed to do our best to alleviate suffering and to save lives. And one can't argue that extending lives is in any way different from saving lives, because ultimately we agree that old people are people too. And so if we reject ageism, then we have to agree that things that kill old people are just as bad as things that kill young people.
Well, you certainly have a good point there. My whole concern is that these systems to extend our lives are leaning towards the cybernetic, merging with all the genetic engineers, kind of like the whole, there's the whole replicant view of Blade Runner, where it's pure biological, designed by machines and humans, versus the cybernetic-cyborg merger. And I just see it leaning more and more towards the cybernetic, and then even on the genetic. I mean, really, once you get into machines and genetics, it's pretty, at least from my novice view, similar in that it's all just programming and setting things up. So as we begin to play God, I see this erasing a lot of what we were. Now the transhumanists say that will actually make us something more human than human. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that it is important not to be too scared about the future decisions that humanity will make sequentially in determining whether to adopt certain opportunities for progress. Because after all, there are plenty of times when we choose not to. For example, we had a very rapid and successful and enthusiastic advance with regard to powered flight during the first two-thirds or so of the last century. But then, what happened? Why do we not have our flying cars now? The answer is not because we couldn't, but because we couldn't be bothered. There wasn't enough pressure for them. And similarly, these biomedical advances that may have the opportunity to merge with non-biological advances will only actually merge with them if the general public are enthusiastic about that and they can see some benefits. Otherwise, the technology just won't be developed.
Well, I happen to love humanity and my heritage and my ancestors and God's creation. I mean, I don't want to fundamentally, I'm all for pacemakers. I'm all for somebody's having seizures to, have a chip put in there. The problem is every time I turn around, I mean, there's a big controversy right now. England, the U.S., they take babies' blood, they put it in a DNA database, and now they want to use it for law enforcement, and they don't tell the soccer moms down on the street that this is going on. We have the eugenics. We have the former head of the Cold Springs Harbor, back when it was a eugenics operation, basically saying blacks are inferior. I mean, we have the bedrock of what is the modern intelligentsia was built on this elitism. And you can say long-term everybody's going to demand these technologies for themselves, but in reality with resources, and the elite tend to do this even when there are enough resources, they like to control the resources as a mode of domination. And down every avenue I see the haves and the have-nots. I'm rich. I don't get cancer. I was genetically engineered, but you're a poor person. You're going to get cancer.
I think there's a good answer to that, a very persuasive answer to that prospect, and reason why we don't need to be worrying about it, which is simply that the reason why we see inequality of access to important things at the moment is because there is not enough desire on the part of the general public, the less wealthy people, to actually get those things. If we look at things that really are very important to everybody, then they are available and the ability to pay is found. Like, for example, basic education is available for free in every country in the Western world, and the reason it's free is because there's a general agreement among the population that it's important enough that it ought to be free. I think it's going to be like that. I think at the moment the medical treatments that we have just aren't effective enough and therefore aren't important enough to drive that sense of there being a fundamental human right to the point where things are free.
I mean, everything's growing exponentially. I think sooner than 30 years, a lot of things you're talking about are going to start happening. Mexican Attorney General, 4 years ago, made a bunch of his employees take implantable chips. Companies are making employees. I've had police chiefs on from the U.S. saying they would forcibly inject us with chips because it's for our own good. Bars make you have it to go into the topless section. All of this is happening. They're just integrating it. And so that's the problem I see, is that things like this are going to be forced on people, and it's going to be sold as a medical treatment, well, we've got to take care of you. We've got all these government paid for clinics with your tax money, and that really these will be systems of control. I
really can't see us chaining people down and rejuvenating them by force. It just doesn't seem very plausible.
See, but I'm not talking about your, I don't want to say narrow, it's a very wide area, but comparatively it's narrow. I'm not talking about what you're doing or how you see this ship you're captaining, where it's going, your vision, which I think has some, a lot of reality to it. I mean, from my own layman's perspective. What I'm saying is that I look at a lot of the other genetic engineer people, a lot of the other people in biology, a lot of the other people, and they are really a bunch of freaks. And I'm sure you know about a lot of your colleagues. I mean, a lot of them are eugenicists, crypto-eugenicists, population reduction enthusiasts. A lot of them are control freaks. They're being hired out by the defense establishment. I mean, I've got CBS News pieces where they're saying they're going to put chips in the prisoners' brains soon and rehabilitate them with programming. I mean, that's enslavement, isn't it?
It sounds pretty much like enslavement to me, but I haven't thought about it or studied it at all. As you say, I'd rather stick to my own narrow area.
Well, I mean, by narrow, it's a wide area, but you have the narrow view that because you're a good guy, you're not doing it for bad. It won't be used for bad. I'm just saying, just like we don't have a big debate about life extension, which we should have because it'll make people desire it and then we will get it. Well, at the same time, when we need a bigger debate about this to make sure it's developed in the right direction instead of being used for bad.
I agree with that.
So how do we do that?
How do we have a big debate? Well, actually, I think progress in getting the debate going on life extension may be a good start. I think a lot of what we've seen in society over the past few decades is really important problems appearing that affect all of us, things like climate change or the ozone layer or whatever, and sometimes we develop technological or other solutions that are just in time to stop them mattering, but we're very slow about it. And I think a large part of why we're slow is apathy, that we don't think, most of us don't think we can do anything. And that's, of course, true at the level of the democratic influence over what the state does in a whole range of ways. So I would say that any progress that we may make in addressing and confronting our oldest foe, namely aging, may actually have a certain amount of role in empowering us, so to speak, and making us aim a bit higher in terms of our ability to control other things and to make sure that technology is used for the good.
But I see the opposite happening. I see the general public completely drunk on entertainment, totally tuning out of reality, the elite providing them, and it also makes money in the free market, with new forms of wirehead-type cyberpunk distractions, literally a acquiescence, a self-insertion into a matrix-like system. I really see it inexorably leading it towards that.
Well, that's right. That's what I'm saying. This is the apathy I'm talking about. And I think that apathy may actually be very strongly diminished once we start to make breakthroughs against this thing that we're all so scared of.
Well, I want to take some phone calls to get different angles and perspectives from listeners at 1-800-259-9231. And we're talking to Dr. Aubrey de Grey. And fire out the website again, sir.
mfoundation.org.
And we've got links to that up on Infowars.com right now. Let's go to Merritt in Kentucky. You're on the air, Merritt.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, sir.
Hello.
Dr. de Grey, I was studying this subject probably a little over a year ago, and I was wondering, is cellular degeneration, is it still being linked to something like oxidation?
Certainly, yes. Oxidation is a damaging, it's a term that covers a wide range of damaging chemical reactions. Unfortunately, it also covers a wide range of important and very desirable chemical reactions. And a large part of the reason why the early attempts to try to control and postpone aging by diminishing the level of oxidation reactions and the level of the products of those reactions is because of the side effects, because one was diminishing the things that we wanted to have as well as the things we didn't want to have. So that's actually one of the sorts of data that led me to the approach that I tend to follow with regard to combating aging, namely to target specifically the undesirable products of things like oxidation rather than targeting the process itself. It tends to be a good deal more capable of avoiding those sorts of side effects.
And what about telomeres? Are you
All right, so the idea that telomere shortening is the dominant influence on the rate of aging is the number one urban myth about aging. Telomere shortening may have